ArcheAge Unchained is a sandbox MMORPG published by Tryon Worlds and developed by XL Games. The game is originally developed in Korea with Jake Song at the helm, who formerly developed the MMORPG Lineage. ArcheAge is described as a hybrid between sandbox and theme park. Sandbox bringing the open world open-ended type gameplay, and theme park bringing structured linearity. ArcheAge originally released in North America on September 16th, 2014, with the Unchained version releasing recently on October 15th, 2019. Unchained was created to change the pay-to-win stigma that ArcheAge was criticized for. Unchained brings in a new monetization model as the game is now buy-to-play with the base price of $25.99 versus being free-to-play. Unchained also has a revamped cash shop, removing many of the items that were deemed as pay-to-win, making the game more appealing to the Western market. I've been playing the game for a while now, and after spending around 100 hours or so on the game, I wanted to share my impressions. So is ArcheAge Unchained worth checking out? Let's get into it. In this video, I'm going to describe AAU as ArcheAge because that's essentially what it is, and it just runs alongside ArcheAge. Starting out in ArcheAge, you create a character choosing from the 6 playable races. Representing the West is the Nuyans, which are more or less humans, as well as the elves and dwarves. On the eastern side, there is the Harani, which look like smaller humans, the Firin, which are best described as cat people, and finally, the Warborn, which are a human-like race with horns. Class structure in ArcheAge is probably one of the game's most alluring features, boasting an incredibly mind-boggling 220 possible classes to play from. The way the class system works in ArcheAge is there is 12 different skill sets to choose from. Creating your character, you choose one skill set to start with, and then a second and third once you hit the appropriate levels. The 3 mixtures of skill sets then determines your class and playstyle, with many different possible ways to play the game. Unfortunately, even though the class system sounds amazing on paper, in practice, it's actually not very practical. Many classes are straight up just not viable in either PvE or PvP because they're synergies of spells and abilities. This is an unfortunate truth, which kinda defeats the purpose of the whole system, but to be quite honest, I'm not sure how they would have been able to balance all classes fairly anyways. With there being so many possible combinations, I suppose it had to be this way. Further customization would be the small passives and active skills you get from your race as well as weapon choice and armor sets. Like many other games out there, you can choose from cloth armor, most likely suited for mage skill sets, which are occultism, aromancy, malediction, songcraft, sorcery, vitalism, and witchcraft, leather armor which complements archery, swift blade, and shadow play, and then finally plate armor, which complements battle rage and defense skill sets. Now I say complements, but you can literally choose any type of armor you want, even mixing pieces together, but you may struggle in endgame content if you choose that sort of playstyle. ArcheAge also has a pretty robust crafting system with a bevy of different vocations to choose from. Some of these would include things like mining, smelting, weapon craft, leatherworking, fishing, husbandry, just to name a few. Crafting is dictated by a secondary currency called labor. Labor is arguably the most important statistic in the game, since it's what allows you to do just about anything in the game. Want to craft a potion? That's gonna cost labor. Got a quest that needs 20 refined iron bars? That also costs labor. Labor regenerates on your account, and yes, I mean account, since labor is not character specific, over time by either playing the game or by being offline, at a rate of about 10 labor every 5 minutes or so. The hook of the crafting system, or meta per se, is to think about how you should be spending your labor to not only level up your vocations so that you can craft better items, but also to make money in the game. The system in and of itself, it's very engaging, and I can't say I've seen anything quite like it. However, much like other systems I'll get into later in the video, it's incredibly confusing and not noob friendly, since if you aren't spending your labor wisely, you can definitely lose out on much needed resources, money, and experience, practically forcing you to look up guides or spend time in real life researching the game. Further systems that don't complement a smooth early game would be systems such as your beginning equipment sets. Now I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here because I've played so many online games at this point, I would have to say this is probably one of the worst systems I have ever seen. In an effort to get players started with endgame gear, ArcheAge elects to have your starting equipment grow with you using items called infusions that grant experience to that item, which will have it grow with you to cap level, which is level 55. That sounds great. Having equipment ready for you once you hit cap is a good system to have. Unfortunately, ArcheAge does not tell you this in a very understandable way, stacked on the fact that when you are leveling, you will get equipment drops that are quite often, stat-wise, better than your mission equipment that you're currently growing. I can't imagine that most MMORPG players will elect to keep their mission equipment if they are unfamiliar with the infusion system, especially on top of the limited inventory size. To further cement how bad this system is currently, if you delete your mission equipment that had been grown using infusions at any point during your gameplay, you will lose the infusion items which can gimp your character at endgame, since you won't have any endgame gear to get you through those high level zones. Think about that explanation. If it sounds confusing, as well as discouraging to players who like collecting loot and new players, that's because it is. Now honestly, once you have learned the system and know what to do, then it's fine. You will be ready for endgame, but let's say you didn't learn about this until after you spent a good amount of time building your character, only to learn that you should probably start all over. I can honestly say this would drive away potential players, and I really do hope that it changes or improves at some point. Luckily, even with that huge negative in the way of the game, I can say the huge positive is its combat system. Combat is a mix of tab, target, and active. Enemies are selected either by clicking on them or pressing tab on the keyboard to attack them with your abilities. Abilities all share a global cooldown, so you can't keep spamming spells, which encourages you to think about your next abilities, as well as synergize them with the combo system. The combo system chains spells together to have additional effects upon certain parameters, such as status effects, or by simply using them one after another. I can't say it's anything innovative to the genre, but it is fun to play around with, especially with the vast class system, since most group makeups will have vastly different classes enveloping the party. Roles are still very much a common theme in ArcheAge, having DPS, healers, tanks, and support, and as stated before, there are many ways to play these roles. Dungeons in ArcheAge are open up around level 30, with several being able to be teleported to right off the bat, with the max party size being 5 that you can bring into them. The dungeon that I did play in my time was unfortunately fairly short, probably due to my guild being carried, but what was there was pretty fun. I just hope they are more engaging in later levels. Areas in the game are also massive, having a total of 3 continents and then the central area which can be traversed using a boat. There is also even naval combat, which unfortunately I haven't experienced myself, but it sounds really interesting. PvP in ArcheAge is probably one of the most strongest communities I've seen in a while, having tons of content actually revolve around engaging in player versus player. Arenas, free-for-all battles, naval ship PvP, world PvP, guild versus guild. It's all here, and a lot of progression is actually based on PvP as well, which is so refreshing to finally see compared to other MMORPGs that tend to shy away from player versus player. Mounts and pets in the game are also pretty streamlined. You get your first mount in your starting area, and your pet in the next several areas after. Mounts and pets level with you, granting more abilities to use with your mount/pet and making them stronger in general. The only drawback to the pets and mounts is that they do take up inventory space, or storage space if you want to collect them all, which can probably lead to some clutter, so I do hope they implement a collection system at some point like World of Warcraft has. There is also a player-owned housing system that is integral to part of the crafting system, since you can use your house to plant trees and perform other activities. Housing is based on free land that is scattered across the world of ArcheAge, meaning there is a finite amount of space that players will compete over to get their housing and farm plots built. This sounds intimidating, but there are things in place like being able to buy land from another player, or by using public farms to plant trees or have livestock so that no one steals them from you since they're protected in those public farms. Stealing and killing players from your own faction builds on the infamy/justice system. If you steal or kill a player in your faction, someone can report you to the authorities, which will then have you put on trial, which is all governed by actual players. What's really funny about this system is you always see this in chat, so a lot of times the court case just devolves into some really funny dialogue or people memeing each other, only for the person on trial to be sent to jail for a certain amount of in-game time. Questing in ArcheAge is pretty standard fare, which is why I left it as one of my last points. Quests are usually going to be kill 5 enemies, collect 5 items, go to a certain spot and interact with something, etc, etc. ad nauseum. The story quests tend to be a little bit more lively, since some will have cutscenes telling the story of your character and the overarching reason you are living in this world, but that's really assuming you're even paying attention and not spamming the skip button. Level grinding in ArcheAge is a bit weird, since the story quests will literally launch you to level 30 and then right after have you smack into a brick wall with the grind. This I never really found to be an issue, however, since it let me explore many areas and get more familiar with the game. Lastly, let's talk about the cash shop and the Gilda currency. Gilda is a currency you earn by completing quests, completing achievements, and finally completing daily quests. Gilda can then be spent in a certain area called the Mirage Isle to buy ships, houses, gliders, etc. It's almost like an earnable cash shop currency, which is pretty nice to see. The cash shop in ArcheAge Unchained is also pretty minuscule. Any currency you purchase in the ArcheAge website will convert to credits, which can then only be spent on cosmetic items. Items in the cash shop that cost diligence is only earnable in-game, which further cements the feel that they were going for being that you have to earn everything in-game. Also, the music and graphics in ArcheAge are pretty breathtaking. All the themes played in the background all fit the areas you explore, and graphically, this is probably one of the better looking MMORPGs I've played. Now, you will need a slightly better than normal gaming PC to run ArcheAge, but nothing crazy, as my laptop is nothing insane and was able to get a smooth 30 to 60 frames out of the game. And that is ArcheAge Unchained. Now, I'm leaving out other features I could have talked about, like the family system or community system, but honestly, there is so much that I could go into or simply have not experienced yet that I would have to say that if you watched this video and the game has piqued your interest, definitely go for it. ArcheAge Unchained is probably one of the better online role-playing games on the market right now, since in the past couple years, there has not really been anything major to shake up the market. So if anything, here is my recommendation. Just be wary of that stupid infusion system. Here is my breakdown of all the pros and cons. If you like open-ended gameplay, ArcheAge Unchained is right up your alley, allowing you to play as a pirate, a craftsman, a trader, darn near anything. The game has a really robust crafting system that complements people who like to play the economy. So if you want to play a trader or play the auction house, then this game has that. The class system is very fun to play with, even if most classes in the huge number of 220 may not be useful. The combat is fun, with a good way of describing it as easy to pick up but hard to master. The developers this time have promised to avoid anything pay to win, and to their credit, they have stuck to their promise. Of course, launch was literally only 2 weeks or so ago, but hey, it is a point towards the developers at this time. There is a lot of PvP content in ArcheAge Unchained, and it's easy to see why some even call this the PvP MMORPG. So if you like player versus player, you might like this game. If you like complexity in a game, then ArcheAge might have something for you. With its vast amount of features and ideas, some may not be for all, but I'm sure something here will tickle your fancy. The game's art style, graphics, and music are great as well, which just adds to the experience, and I'm glad they did not skip on this department. Lastly, ArcheAge Unchained is technically a release of a 5-year-old game at this point, so if you are worried about content, don't worry. You have 5 years worth of content to experience, so you should be busy for quite a while. If you couldn't tell from my rant earlier, the equipment infusion system early game is such a mess, it may turn off potential newcomers to the game. So definitely read up on this system before jumping in. The game definitely requires that you do a lot of research before you really start playing seriously. If that sounds like too much of a hassle to do, you won't like ArcheAge. Now, while complexity and a lot of features are good most of the time, sometimes it can be a little overwhelming. So a lot of these systems and features may be a bit too much to understand or are outright just not good. Housing can be a bit of a sore spot if you missed out on the initial grab. So if you are coming into the game a little late, it may be hard to get a player-owned house now, so you may have to do some extra legwork. Simply put, if you are an MMORPG player that sticks to PvE, ArcheAge is probably not going to be for you. A lot of systems reward PvP, and it is encouraged in some instances, so while you may be able to avoid PvP for a while, you will eventually need to start dipping your toes in. The labor system can be interesting, but if you run out of labor, you really can't do too much in terms of equipment upgrading or crafting, meaning you either log off or go do PvP or PvE. Unfortunately, the game is not too alt-friendly, since you can't trade anything between characters except for small items. So if you spent anything in the cash shop on one character, you can't trade it to another, which means you might have wasted spending your extra currency. The initial bag space is pretty low, and while you can earn bag space later on, it won't be for a while unless you spend money on the packs in store that you buy with real money. You also only get 2 character slots on your whole account, which is baffling considering that most MMORPGs want you to play as much as possible. This is most likely to reduce the problem of housing becoming too scarce, and you can get up to 6 character slots eventually, but it is something to mention. Finally, ArcheAge is a massive game, so if you don't see yourself putting a lot of time into it, you won't get too much out of the game in my opinion, and quite honestly, you could probably say that about most MMORPGs on the market. That's all for this video, guys and gals. Thanks for watching. Comment down below your thoughts on ArcheAge and if you are playing ArcheAge Unchained. If you liked this video, please give it a like, as it really does help drive interaction. Subscribing also truly helps the channel, so I would really appreciate if you clicked that subscribe button, as well as the bell to get notified when I post another video. You can also follow me on Twitter, where I occasionally post updates about videos and other things. My link is down below if you want to follow me there. I also want to give a shout out to my loyal followers who always help out with videos and support me. Anyways, that is this video, and I will see you in the next one.